Two daily newspaper strips, each beginning as gag-a-day comics, centering around the romantic foibles of their central characters, would feel the irresistible call of adventure. Popeye would step into E.C. Segar's meandering Thimble Theater and transform it into something more like Treasure Island, with pirates, lost treasure, and hamburgers. Washtubs, a short, bespectacled, girl-crazy lead character of Roy Crane's strip, would eventually meet Captain Easy and follow him on one thrilling adventure after another, pushing them both to the limits of their endurance. In selections from the Smithsonian collection of newspaper comics, we find both of these strips caught up in adventure on the high seas, Popeye in comedic fashion, Washtubs and Captain Easy in a harrowing tale aboard the doomed whaler Jonah. Today on Truth, Beauty, Comics.
Welcome to Truth, Beauty, Comics. I'm Levi, a cartoonist.
And I'm Felix, a guy who likes comics.
And this is the podcast where we look for transcendence in a pulpy medium. And today we'll be continuing our wildly popular discussion of newspaper comics from 100 years ago. You know, this is, you do one for yourself and one for the fans. And this is clearly, we're playing to just the TikTok legions who love these old newspaper comics. But these are two good ones, I think. These are some of my, particularly, I've been a huge Roy Crane fan. But I think that the Popeye story that we're going to look at today is also pretty great. But yeah, we looked at kind of a lot of different like newspaper strips. And this is, I think, really the first time we're diving into the dailies from the old newspaper strips. So, kind of what were your impressions reading through these for the first time?
I was super impressed. I was new to both of them. So, I'd obviously seen the old Fleischer Popeye animated shorts as a kid, and I enjoyed them as much as the next kid. But I never read the strip.
Did you see the Robert Altman movie by any chance?
I did back as a kid. I have virtually no memory of it, and I kind of want to rewatch it because I watched a short YouTube video after finishing reading the strips that had I think it was a selection from a documentary, but it had interviews with a bunch of different cartoonists, and the guy who wrote the script for the Popeye movie was actually like fairly insightful in talking about the strip and why it was such a hit. Which kind of makes me interested to see it because I a little bit had kind of written it off. Much as I enjoy Robin Williams in pretty much anything. But yeah, so I want to go back and watch that again. But yeah, so I was, familiar with Popeye and knew the kind of cultural references. And my father fairly regularly will say, "I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today."
Right.
So, I knew the references. Whereas Washtubs and Captain Easy, the only thing I knew about it was that you are gaga over the strip. You're the only person I've ever heard I've seen bits and pieces of brief references to Roy Crane's work in different books about comics, but I'd never picked up or even really heard anyone other than you talk about his work. And I was really impressed with both in different ways, which I think we'll kind of dig into.
Yeah, they're very different. It's funny because they're both in a pretty similar setting. Kind of adventure on the high seas with a kind of two-fisted, scrappy main character at the center. But they're both getting very different things out of the characters and settings. But before we started this, we were kind of talking. I think both Thimble Theater, to be renamed Popeye, and Washtubs and Captain Easy are interesting examples of daily strips where they began. Popeye was introduced years, I think, into Thimble Theater, and same thing for Washtubs. They both began as much more just like kind of daily jokes without really any continuity other than the characters. But there wasn't any larger arcs that happened, and they evolved into something somewhat different directions, but both totally different. And I wonder, I don't know, Felix, we were kind of thinking about this with, how you need to give like TV shows at least one season usually for them to get any good. Like the first season is generally kind of the worst, even with very good TV shows.
Yeah.
And I think with newspaper comics, I really see this too, that you had these artists who were just kind of thrown into like headfirst into these strips, right? And they're like, hey, draw something every day of the week.
Yeah.
And most of that probably isn't very good, but some of them, just that repetition, you see them starting to reach these different levels. And I think both of these stories we're reading today is where they're on a high, right? They're on a creative high, but there's years of just like drawing every single day before they get to these points. So, but it takes some development, and it's interesting just to watch just kind of the historical evolution of these strips.
Yeah, I think of this one story that I've heard, which is true, about a professor, but I've forgotten where he was. I want to say it was one of the University of California schools. He taught a photography class, and each year he would give students the option to submit a single photo for the whole semester or just a sheer number of photos. And if memory serves, you were graded on the quality of the one picture if you had one. If it was the multiple ones, you were graded on the number of photos. So it was like if it's under, 250 or something, I'm picking numbers, but if it's under 250, it's a D, right? If it's, and to get an A, you have to send in more than like 1,500 or something like that. Huge number. And then at the end of the year, there would always be like a show with sort of the best photos, and would give people, I think, like the opportunity to say what their favorites were. And every single year, all the highest rated photos were the ones by people taking tons and tons of photos. Yeah. Which is obvious, right? Mm-hmm. That, A, you've got more chances to get something good if you do it a lot. But also B, you're cultivating the skills, you're cultivating the habits, right? You're becoming... Right, your eye is being trained in a certain way by doing it more. And it's the same thing with comics and writing, I think, right? There is something, it's so much more disappointing when an author who puts out a book every 10 to 15 years has a dud, because it's, I'm going to wait another real huge chunk of time. Whereas if somebody's putting out a book every year or two, if there's a bad one, okay, you move on. There's going to be another.
Right.
And I think that that's a big part of why newspaper strips have such staying power, despite being an inherently ephemeral medium, because you have these artists who I think probably all have a certain amount of innate talent and have inclination towards drawing for their own enjoyment. And these, right, the right people were hired for the most part, but then they're just forced into, frankly, a kind of grueling schedule.
Yeah.
It made them grow, made them develop as artists, as storytellers, and gave them the chance to sort of develop such a body of work that you really have the chance for these stories that are remembered 60, 70, 80, 90 years later. Again, despite the fact that it was printed on newspaper, like the cheapest paper you could get on crummy ink that smudges. And yet, right, a lot of, various strips like this are getting these prestige releases today. I think of, Prince Valiant is probably unfair because it's just sort of so painterly, right? And was always almost a kind of cut above the rest in certain ways. It's kind of unusual. But Popeye, right? Fantagraphics has been, this publisher I really like, has been putting out editions of the Popeye Sunday strips. And it's not as though they're New York Times bestsellers or anything, but people want them, right? There is real demand because they are so good. And at this point, I think most of the people reading them couldn't have been reading them in the paper in the 30s, right? It's you and me saying, "Oh, I want to read more of this."
Yeah.
But connected to that, it's sort of a shame that Wash Tubbs and Captain Easy, there's a relative paucity of republications of them.
Yeah,
because
truly.
I'm interested to read more.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting because there's one Fantagraphics that put out a kind of best of the daily strips.
Yeah, I saw that. Good. I want to buy it.
Yeah, it's really good. But other than that, there was a complete collection that came out in like the 80s by Bill Blackbeard, actually collected them.
Nice.
But they're very hard to find. They've been out of print for decades, and you can find them. I found one at McKay's Books in Knoxville once, just in the cartoon, comic strip section. I was like, total, delightful find. And I've always, they're the first thing I look for whenever I go to a used bookstore, because sometimes they just pop up in random places. But back to kind of what you were saying though, I think it's interesting, just kind of my experience, with drawing. I think one of the things that's hard when you want to draw well and want to be an artist is that the one thing you have, you're not born a good artist, but I think the one thing you have, maybe Ira Glass talked about this or something, but you just have kind of good taste, or there's a specific taste that you can see something, you go, I like that, right? That's really good. You don't know why, you can't really describe it, but you want to draw like that, or you want to do something like that. But then there's this huge gap between your abilities and kind of what seems to have magically happened with these artists that you love, right? And so it can be a really, because you're the one, when you draw for the first time, and as you're developing your skill drawing, you can see all the problems with it. And you can see, because the one thing you actually have is the ability to, like, what something good looks like, even if you can't create that. So all your instincts are to like try to perfect, you tinker, you're like, oh, I'm just going to like try this again and try to do that. And it's never very good because it takes years and years and years of practice to get good at this stuff. And that's why I think, a lot of people end up just kind of quitting in frustration because it's just so hard to develop that. Whereas, kind of the newspaper strip, maybe manga is another example of this, is a perfect kind of place to develop your talent because it forces you not to tinker, right? It forces you to draw a lot really quick. And you're not trying to perfect where you're at right now, but it's just like someone once said, everyone has like 1,000 bad drawings inside of them. And the key is just to get them all out, and I kind of think that that's true. It's like, if you want to draw good, you just got to draw your bad stuff first. And that's where I think, you see with the daily newspaper strips, some of these people I feel this way with like, Milt Caniff too. A lot of them, if they have these long runs, I mean, Charles Schultz is another example. It took him about a decade to where Peanuts was just this amazing creation. Mm-hmm. But it was, it started off it wasn't bad by any means, but it wasn't that noticeably different than like a family circus or something kind of initially, and until it gets elevated to just these incredible stories and characters. So I do think there's something about just the schedule, the kind of the grueling schedule of the newspaper strip, even Calvin and Hobbes, that just kind of forges, these cartoonists into, creating some really impressive, amazing stuff.
Yeah, the loss of the newspaper strip is something I really lament.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I think of my hometown newspaper, and I mean, I'm from a small town, but when I was a kid, there was a page of comics. So there were probably about 15 comics every day. Now there are 4. There are a lot of papers that have gone under, and virtually all papers have drastically cut the number of strips that they reprint. And so there are far fewer readers. There are far fewer strips getting any exposure, and there's so little space. Even from when I was a kid, 20 years ago, most comics pages, the actual space for each strip is even smaller, and it was already pretty small.
Yeah.
And so there are a few people working now who are still doing interesting things. I think of Mark Tatuli, and I think of Stephen Pastis, who does Pearls Before Swine. Mm-hmm. Like they'll have things that are, and I have an affection for mutts, but for the most part, it's
pretty dead medium sort of
at
this point.
Dead medium.
Yeah. And I don't think comic books develop talent in the same way.
No.
Because newspaper strips, for all their drawbacks, they are very much like, hey, you write and draw this because you have to have this out every single day. We don't have time to have like a scripter to hand it off to an artist and a colorist. It's like, it's very much one-man show, and it has to be drawn really quick. I think manga might be closer, just from what I know about the production process of manga, where that's a lot more. But even they
tend to have an assistant, though.
Yeah, true.
Or even a couple, but no, it is still. I think that's sort of the only place where I really see that I know of. Now, bande dessinée, French comics, I think still have a bit of this, but I think even that is kind of slowed down. And I mean, it's understandable also because you hear these stories, particularly with manga artists, you hear these stories of people just being broken by it.
Right.
The most famous is Yoshihiro Togashi, who did Yu Yu Hakusho and Hunter x Hunter, where like Hunter x Hunter has been around since 1998 or 9, but it's been on hiatus for about half that time. It's published pretty regularly because he's had such intense physical issues because of it. And at this point, he can only draw lying down.
Wow.
Like he'll just go years without publishing anything. I think sometimes he's just working on his health, and then sometimes he's working on stuff slowly in the background. But I think newspaper strips were kind of the sweet spot where it was a reasonable amount to expect of someone.
Right.
A lot of work, but it was not insane for a person to be running 2 strips concurrently.
Yeah.
It was a massive amount of work, but like, you can understand how someone can do that, right? And now, right, there's, in the American context, I think there's really nothing that gives people the chance to develop as storytellers in the way that newspaper comic strips did. Despite the fact that, I mean, there are still great things coming out. I don't mean to say that there aren't great storytellers and great artists, but I sort of imagine that a lot of them would be even better if they sort of had this chance. There are also at the same time limitations to the newspaper format, right? Like especially for daily adventure strips, like you're doing so little of the story in each day that like frankly, when I was a kid, I was not interested in adventure strips because you got so little at a time. Whereas now when I can have a whole book of them, I just tear through it. Like I'll read Prince Valiant. I'll just sort of sit down and read a year of strips.
Yeah.
And that's very different.
And he even was working in the Sunday format. So you had a lot more to cover even in a single page, right? But if you think about like, if you're trying to like each day you progress the story. I mean, I do remember as a kid, like one of the few adventure, quote unquote, adventure strips that was still publishing was Mark Trail. And I was like, who is this for? Is this like a comic for octogenarians or something?
Bored by it.
It was just like nothing happened in that dang comic. So yeah, maybe, for our attention spans, maybe it was just a doomed thing at this point anyway. But it is fun looking back on them.
Shall we start looking at the Popeye?
Yeah, let's dive in. We'll put this up on video for those watching on YouTube, so we can kind of follow along.
And I have to confess, so I love this Smithsonian collection of newspaper comics that you turned me on to. For these, I read a few in the book of the Popeye, and then I realized that on Hoopla I could get the color strips, and so I ended up reading most of this digitally, which I really prefer reading in print. But it was really nice to have the colors, even though Popeye isn't sort of specifically famous for its color or anything. But it was just sort of a little bit more fun. And then because of that, I also read a little bit beyond. And what happens right after the end of this strip? Do you know?
I don't. I mean, that's kind of one of the things that's hard about these is just they just
really,
end. You're like,
the 2 strips right after the end of this, I wish were included in the collection. And we'll get to that when we get there. But yeah, so Popeye, I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed this. I knew that people liked it. I knew that it was a sort of a cult classic comic, but I was really impressed just by the way that it balanced a lot of genuinely funny moments that just got me. Like I laughed out loud quite a few times while reading this, but then also with an imaginative adventure that I can see why it has stuck with people for a really long time.
Yeah, I agree. I think this one, I started reading these as a kid. I think particularly this one has a surprisingly kind of spooky start that I really love.
Yeah.
The first few pages or I don't really know. Yeah, I guess pages of this. They introduce these characters. It's kind of your typical setup of a treasure island kind of sea adventure. Someone knows where gold is buried, but there's this witch. It's what is it? Plunder Island? What is this called?
Yeah, I think
that they're trying to find. Yeah. There's this witch called the Sea Hag, who controls Plunder Island, and she's trying to prevent them from finding the way to it. And she comes into port one night to Professor Quigley, Cringely, Kringley. How do you pronounce this guy's name?
I have no idea.
Kringley. Yeah, she comes in because Professor Kringley is the only way, the only person who knows how to get to Plunder Island to kidnap him. And it's a very spooky kind of sequence. That she has this monster that follows her around called the Sea Goon. I've always thought, particularly this sequence where the Sea Goon just kind of appears in the hallway of the restaurant. Creepy. It is. It's I don't know. It's really effective. Not what I would expect to find in a, Popeye comic if I was just to pop it up.
By the way, are you able to zoom in with your camera at all? Just because I'm thinking this is a very sort of
very far out.
Yeah, well, and the strip just has, I mean, it is massive and it has sort of so many
we'll do our best
so many panels.
Yeah. Let's see.
But yeah, I think the Sea Goon, both the Sea Hag and the Goon are really striking. That sort of first image. Actually, here let's pause while you try to figure out just to. Yeah.
About as close as I can get.
Yeah, that improves it a lot. That makes it a lot more.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can just cut this a little bit up, but here I'll start back over here. Yeah, that first image of the Sea Goon, you sort of first see the Goon kind of in the background at one point, but then Popeye and his friend Bill see the Goon, and it's really a creepy sort of monster that is not immediately similar to any single kind of mythic creature that you think of. It's got kind of hairy arms and legs, but only on sort of the bottom half of each. Is sort of white, and it particularly, I think, works in the color format because you have a lot of color around it, and then the Goon is completely white and then sort of brownish blackish hair.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it really sort of grabs me at least.
Yeah. The other thing too that I think you have these, and I think that the art is pretty strong too on this point, where he's using the night setting works really well. So the characters, you just got it's one where just maybe even the shrunken nature of the artwork kind of works in its favor, where you just have these faded kind of details in the background and shadow, and very, very effective kind of creepy setting. Great start to a story, right? So it ends with Professor Cringely being kidnapped and drug off by the Sea Goon to the Sea Hag's, or not to the Sea Goon, but by the Goon to the Sea Hag's ship. And now they're going to chase Professor Cringely, and they're going to try to find the treasure on Plunder Island.
And also, having never read the comic, I was impressed by how, let's say, easily graspable each character was, because they are kind of, they do feel sort of like archetypes, but they also are very distinctive. And Wimpy particularly, I was really impressed by just how consistently funny he was. So for those unfamiliar, Wimpy is, what's his full name again? Like Jay Wellington.
Yeah, something like that.
But he goes by Wimpy, and all he cares about is hamburgers, and then secondarily other food, but basically just hamburgers. And throughout, he just consistently had these great gags that like seemed really, they were very deceptively simple, and they would just consistently get laughs from me. There was this running joke, which I don't know if it's just in this story or if it's one sort of throughout all of it, where he would sort of pretend to be somebody, Mr. Jones, one of the Jones boys, and every time that happened, I would laugh. And then there's the cobbler who hates Wimpy, who we'll get into in a bit, who just like, he, I think, is like an ethnic stereotype, possibly of a Jewish character. But he,
I was wondering about that.
Little bit broken English, and he just hates Wimpy, just hates him with a passion. And he'd have various sort of things that he would say over and over about Wimpy, and he would regularly say, "He has flies in my soup." And every time he said that, I would initially sort of smile, and then by the end, every time he would say that, I would laugh, because just something about you know, Segar or Cigar, I think it's Segar because he would make like jokes about like signing it with a cigar. But like Segar just has this a really impressive sense of timing within the comic medium, which is
Yeah.
so hard to develop, and that I think works both for the comedy and for the action. That I mean, it's not the action is not kind of like intense drama the way that you might get in, I mean, for instance, Wash Tubbs and Captain Easy. Uh, but it is compelling action that
Yeah.
grabbed me at least.
It's fun to read. I think that, yeah, it's a story that moves really pretty well. Um, and you're right. I think there's it's a very light touch, right? So people
Yeah.
jump overboard to commit suicide at numerous times. Very very Looney Tunes. But also it's a it's not just gags. It's actually like a story that's being told about this hunt for treasure.
And for me, the gag that really got me was there's this, horrid, horrid sea hag, that's just nasty and evil, and no one likes her. And Wimpy is just very respectful to her, and comes out this
Very gentlemanly.
on the January 21st strip. It says, and in the after, while Popeye is getting into a fight, um, Wimpy, good morning, you wonderful woman. I hope you slept well. I wish to thank you for allowing me the freedom of your ship. She says, maybe I'm getting soft, Mr. Wimpy, but somehow you thrill me strangely. Your calling me a wonderful woman has kindled a tiny spark of tenderness within me, which I thought to be dead. Won't you drink a cup of tea with me? I too thrill at your proximity. You are the gem of the ocean. Do you, by chance, happen to have a bit of a sandwich handy? And she says, I have 50 pounds of delicious frozen hamburger in the refrigerator. I'll have the cook fry one for you. I beg pardon? Did you say hamburger? Yes, hamburger. And he gives her a big kiss and thinks of a hamburger and says, wonderful lady, I cannot restrain myself longer. Oh, pearl of the sky blue waters, eyes like distant suns, radiant with atomic fire, my beloved hamburger, sea hag. And this gag just got me consistently of him just sort of loving this sea hag because she has lots of hamburger. I don't know. It really worked for me. Um, and also just these descriptions, I thrill at your proximity. And then the one that really got me is the Gibraltar of masculinity. And he's sort of referring to himself as the Gibraltar of masculinity a few times. And then later on, when Popeye comes in order to encourage Popeye, says, "Oh, you are the Gibraltar of masculinity." And I want to start using this phrase. I Googled it and see
Yeah.
that no one has picked up on this wonderful phrase from an old Popeye strip. So I want to make the Gibraltar of masculinity a thing.
Yeah, that is another thing to point out. I think um, one of the things that works really well about this is just the dialogue that
Yeah.
that he gives all his characters, because they all have. I mean, Popeye obviously, talks like an old sea dog or whatever. But then Wimpy has some really hilarious dialogue. Um, and the sea hag as well. That there's just a lot of clever writing here. That we talked about Giesel, I believe his name is. He's flies in my
Yeah.
soup.
He has flies in my soup.
Yeah, there's just some there's some very funny stuff. If you I don't know, Bill Harriman also had some pretty clever, strange dialogue. But I think Segar here is pretty gifted with the turn of a phrase if you actually start reading
And
the
this is a
dialogue.
much lower barrier of entry, right? Because
yeah,
Harriman's Crazy Cat is so just strange, right? It's kind of
right.
It's always, I won't say it's inscrutable, but it takes no little scruting.
Yeah.
Whereas, you kind of pick up a Popeye story and you get a sense like, here's good guy, here's bad guy. Popeye's really strong, and Wimpy is Wimpy, and just wants to eat. Yeah, it just has these lines that'll grab you. I love when the sea hag tells Wimpy to go and behead Popeye, and he
Yes.
takes the sword and says, "Yes, ma'am," and then he's walking away. Oh, good heavens! What am I about to do? Mercy! It wouldn't be right to behead Popeye. I'm no murderer. And then he goes back to the sea hag. She says, "Well, did you do it? Where's Popeye's head?" He says, "I don't suppose you'd be satisfied with his big toe, hmm? Cutting off a man's head is rather rude, isn't it?" Like, just what a great sort of character to put these kind of turns of phrase in it. Right,
Yeah.
just the description, right? He has this kind of a consistent, and the one that gets me too later on is right. So Popeye, not to jump around in the story too much, but I think that this is one there. It's kind of works well
Yeah.
to jump around a bit.
It's not super plot heavy.
Yeah, the sea hag gets a bunch of spinach to give to the goon, so that the goon will be really strong and be able to beat Popeye. And so Popeye is like, "Oh, I need to have lots of spinach and good fresh milk." And so he brings a cow onto the deck of the ship. And Wimpy just consistently is, "May I please have this cow for hamburger purposes?" And just sort of constantly asking about having the cow for hamburger purposes. And I just love the phrase "for hamburger purposes."
Right. Which is it could be grotesque. He ends up continually trying to cut off the tail.
Yeah.
And he ends up somehow getting it through a series of shenanigans with the shark.
Yeah, when a
And
shark pulls
converting.
off the tail and he says, "Could I please have this for hamburger purposes?"
Yeah.
Possibly my
Popeye
favorite gag in the whole time, though,
Yeah.
is when the cobbler, right, is just so annoyed at Wimpy. This is April 1st. So on the April 1st one, um, this cobbler with a huge beard is just jumping up and down, angry, saying, "Why don't you die? You no good for something cheesecake. If other peoples won't do it, then it is up to me to kill you to death. Me, the last of the Geezels." And as he's sort of ranting and raving at Wimpy about how much he hates him and how Wimpy should die and all this, Wimpy just sort of slowly is like cutting off a bunch of the guy's super long beard and pasting it to his own face so that he looks like a different person. And he's doing this as Giesel is actively yelling at him. And then he says, "Oh, excuse me, where is Wimpy? Did you see Wimpy someplace? Jones is my name. I'm one of the Jones boys. I just now pushed Wimpy into the ocean. Ha! I am ticklish to meet the man who pushed Wimpy. Giesel is my name. Oh, one of the Giesel boys. You don't happen to be George G. Giesel, the famous shoemaker. It's me. I'm him." And then it goes from daytime to nighttime.
Yeah.
"But we've been sitting here for 4 hours. We really should retire." "No, my friend, I must tell you again what a fine man you are. Ah, ain't it great to have no Wimpy?" Like, I don't know why, but this gag just really got me.
It's really funny.
He's so, like, Wimpy is so matter of fact as he's sort of taking the canvas glue and applying it to his face and cutting off the whiskers. Like, it just the use of characters, right? They're very simple characters. They're sort of easy to grasp. But it worked so well with the comedy. I was really impressed. I want now to sort of buy some of the collections of Popeye because I'd like to read more of these strips because they're just phenomenal.
Yeah, there's I think one of the things that works so well with, I mean, we've been talking a lot about Wimpy, but he gets a lot of the mileage here, is he's kind of a Bugs Bunny-esque character, right? And I think that's one of the when you have a character like this, you have to know how to deploy them just right, where it's, they're kind of exempt from the laws of that the other characters have, right? He's always unperturbed, clearly kind of in his own world, never really that bothered. And here this just feels like this is a gag that Bugs Bunny would pull, where he just puts on a disguise real quick and everyone just
Yeah.
accepts it, and he escapes through that sort of thing. But yeah, it's very clever humor, and I don't know, we've man, what year was this? This was in the 30s,
This
right?
was
We're talking
30s. I
about.
think this was 33 and 34. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, this kind of stuff. I'm like, this is really funny. As when we were like 20 years ago, like some of the comic strips was like the humor is now very recognizable if you're just looking at like a
Yeah.
historical, kind of historical movement. But this stuff is, it makes you wonder how much of our humor was actually kind of formed by comic strips or what, just because it's very recognizable at this point as
Yeah.
really hilarious jokes.
Now, the sort of last thing, if there's anything else you want to kind of touch on with Popeye.
Nope.
Right, there's lots of madcap adventures that are all very fun, and I highly recommend reading. But at the end of the sort of selection that's in the Smithsonian collection, Popeye and all the heroes end up with the treasure, and it's wonderful, and he's got crazy massive amounts of money, and then he goes home and he buys this or he starts renting this gorgeous apartment and all this. This is sort of after the end of what's collected, and he realizes he's not actually that happy being rich, that it hasn't really improved his life in any way. And so he just starts going around and giving bags of money away to like poor mothers with children so that they
Oh,
can buy homes and buy lots of spinach and a cow for fresh milk for their kids. It's very sort of a, I don't know, like a Chestertonian and Bellockian distributism, just kind of
hmm.
getting every family their, 3 acres and a cow. Just really, yeah, it was striking, and then he sort of gives it all his money away, and then he's happy. But Olive Oil is really concerned, like, you've gotten rid of all your money. What are you going to do? And so Olive Oil, who was on who also got a chunk of the money, gives him $50,000, and he says, okay, I'll keep that. And then he comes upon this woman who sort of pretends to be in dire straits, and he gives the money to her, and then he tells Olive Oil, and Olive Oil says, no, she's like just a gold digger, like she's just going to take your money and have a good time. And then he goes and sees that that's exactly what she's doing and takes the money back. He says, okay, I'm not going to give it away to anybody, like I've learned my lesson. There's these fraudsters, these hucksters are out there. And then as he's walking home, he meets another woman who again is in real straits, with her crying child, and she's like, I think her husband had died and they're living on the street. So go buy a house and get lots of spinach and buy a cow for good fresh milk for your kids. And I was just very struck by that. That like he's going on the big adventure for gold, right? Which is just
Hmm.
an infinitely entertaining story, right? I could not count the number of venture strips that have done, if not, if not 100, at least one stories, around the quest for pirates treasure, quest for gold, going on a ship, all this, right? And there's Treasure Island is the sort of iconic one, but there are lots and lots of stories like this. But that he chose to sort of have that really fun story, and it's really genuinely enjoyable, and then after that also kind of have this reflection on the fact that like wealth does not satisfy us. And I was
Hmm.
I was really struck by that, that like
Yeah.
he's happy when he's adventuring, right? So in the sort of Aristotelian terminology, right, he's happy when he's in act rather than potency. And then afterwards, he's not really happy just sort of sitting on wealth, but he is happy helping others. And
Yeah.
I was just struck by that inclusion, just that it wasn't,
Yeah.
because even though it is a very silly, funny strip, and even those strips are funny, they've got good gags in them,
Yeah.
but that there is kind of within it a bit of a kind of moral content there that
Yeah.
we like, even though every little boy or girl reading this strip as a kid wants to go out and adventure and be on the high seas and get pirates gold. And the adventuring is good and everything, but ultimately you're not going to be satisfied by wealth. I was just very struck by that.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder how much Depression era kind of,
Yeah.
fears and desires stuff too plays into that. Cause this would be probably smack dab in the middle of that, I would think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
All right, so on
So,
to
Highly
Wash tubs. Oh,
recommended.
you go ahead. You know far more about this than I.
Yeah, I mean it's a similar story. So Roy Crane, artist who started this as like a gag-a-day strip, basically centered around Wash Tubbs, who's kind of a self-portrait of the artist, um, and mostly just around him running a store, kind of in Middle Ohio. And then I think he just couldn't sustain it, so he started sending him off on adventures and introduced this character Captain Easy, who became kind of the center, or their relationship at least became the center of the strip. But later, Captain Easy would get his own Sunday strip and kind of spun out as the main character. But all that to say, I think for me, I'd say this one goes kind of on my Mount Rushmore of comics. It's something I am just I continually go back to, and I think this sequence collected here, or this story, which is, it's a pretty complete story, is very kind of peak. It's not like he has other stories that are as good as this, but this one is one of his best in my. But you never read his stuff before.
Yeah, so I'd never read any of his work, and it's a setup that sort of you understand immediately. There's a kind of tweedy little boy and a hard scrabble older guy, and they go on adventures, right. And that's all you need to know. And then right, and if you've read any Terry and the Pirates, which comes a little later, I think, then and might have been influenced by Crane's work. Again, it's a similar kind of setup. Boy and man going on adventures, and but this particular adventure was just so cool because it's on a whaling ship, and like,
right.
I've read Moby Dick. I love it. It's probably a top 10 novel for me. But like, I am not a practical person. I am not a mechanically minded person. My 4-year-old, who is obsessed with machines and pulleys and all these things, understands a lot of things about the physical world about as well as I do, if not better. And so I loved seeing the kind of images of the whales, and like when they're scraping the blubber off of the whales, and it sort of shows kind of the anatomy of the sperm whale and talks a little bit about it. Like, it was genuinely educational for me as an adult.
Right.
And I can only imagine being a little kid and just having your imagination fed by this, sort of exciting story. So I loved this, and I loved all the whaling. Like, I was really into the whaling in this comic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I don't know. I'm interested to kind of hear you talk a little bit about some of the art and storytelling, because I read it and I loved it, but I don't have deep insights about it. I just know I want to read more. Like, I feel like Popeye, I feel like I kind of get a little bit. I have a sense of what Segar's doing and why it works so well. But Wash Tubbs and Captain Easy, I kind of just have to say, like, this is great.
Right.
So explain to me a little bit about why this is so good, why this works so well, what Crane is doing, and what you sort of admire about him as an artist and storyteller.
Yeah, well, I'll start with why I love this story in particular. I think, and to summarize it very quickly, for the listener, the story basically starts where you have Wash Tubbs, who's this shrimp, and Captain Easy. They're basically pressed into service. Their money is stolen. They're kind of kidnapped and pressed in to working on a whaler by this first mate, who's this just gorilla of a man. And if you know anything about these characters, like Captain Easy's, he's this larger than, he never loses really in their adventures. He's set back a few times, but really a formidable guy. Right. Always wins the fights, really hard to beat down. And very resourceful. And this mate character just repeatedly just kicks his butt. And really can just have his way with almost intimidating him. So it's an interesting one. Whereas if you're, even if you're used to like, a superhero characters from these times, they usually pretty quickly dispatch the villains. So it's kind of this contest that's set up over the story that takes place on a whaling ship between Easy and this first mate. It's kind of a battle of wills, literally a battle of strength at times. And I think they're good contrasts character wise too, whereas you see this mate who just kind of gets worse and worse, to the point of murdering, intimidating, beating them. Easy, in contrast, shows real character throughout this kind of story, whereas he won't take revenge when he's given the opportunity. He won't even kill him when he's given the opportunity to let this man die. He's looking out for his friend. He's looking out for the good of the rest of the crew. So it's more than just kind of a typical kind of power wish fulfillment fantasy, right? This is a story where the people are just like exhausted constantly. They're really just, there's points where they'll see a whale and they're like, not another whale. We can't do it. We're too tired. It's just too much work for them to even catch these things. So you feel kind of their exhaustion and just, they're kind of at the end of their rope throughout the story. It pushes them to this kind of confrontation at the end that where they come out on top, but it's still not it's somewhat bittersweet. They're stranded on an ice floe at the end of the story, just, trying to get to shore. So it's pretty intense. And from my perspective, I just like this story where this kind of battle of wills that's set up over it.
Yeah. The first mate, he's great. Like, he's just one of those characters. He looks, this is a strange way of describing him, but he looks a bit like an evil Mario, not like Wario, but he's just this kind of gruff guy with a mustache, kind of on the larger side. He's got a hook hand, and he does sort of, over the course of the story, you come to realize more and more just kind of the level of his iniquity.
Yeah,
he's just a bad guy, and I really like the inclusion of the captain. That the captain is this kind of meek and basically good man who's running. So at this time, whaling. So these days, today, whaling is basically illegal in basically everywhere. But right, it used to be a huge business, and it's sort of referred to here as like the last of the old school whaling ships. And the captain is actually a good man, kind of noble man, but he's old, decrepit, and made a bad hiring choice in the first mate. And this kind of brings, I won't even say it causes ripples. It causes, a tsunami of pain for others. And there's something kind of striking there, that there's this, I think there's a little bit of a deeper sense that like there is an older kind of economic system where there is a sense of honor and a sense of taking care of your men, this kind of thing, and men coming together to do a very, very difficult, intense, dangerous job, and then kind of over time a certain like degradation of society and these kinds of things, that frankly kind of crummy people get power, and in this case really dramatically, right, like actually kidnap people in order to force them into labor, right, and then are beating them and punishing them and all these really rough things, putting them in situations that are even worse than sort of, and more dangerous than would naturally happen on a whaling ship, which again is already a dangerous situation. There's this scene where after they've just gotten a whale, they see another and they're all just dead tired and they need to sleep. And the first mate makes them go out again, and a bunch of the guys die because of it. It's just that hit me, because there is this, physical labor is a bit different now, right? So this kind of cruelty more happens in, like Amazon warehouses, rather than a whaling ship, so it's not the same kind of mistreatment in America. But then obviously in other countries, a lot of the people making a lot of the stuff that we have now are you know, sometimes literal slaves and if not literal slaves, practically,
Yeah.
and it's just very, I don't know, it's sad, but it's also kind of encouraging, right? Because there is this sense of justice winning out and the kind of
Yeah.
good guys fighting hard and it working.
Yeah. I mean, if you, the history of just, how ships were run, it really does seem like you could have anywhere between, a very happy ship, right? Where the people were respected their leaders, the leaders respected them. It was discipline was critical always, right? Everything had to be run very tightly and disciplined. But then you could also have just some real tyrants who could make life just hell for the
Yeah.
people that they were on board with. And they didn't have a lot of recourse, right? It's not like there's an HR department that you can call up and complain about it. You're basically, you have a dictator in the the hierarchy of this ship, and you could get getting whipped, beaten to the point of death was not uncommon. So it's interesting though, because in the setting of this story, this is kind of it's the last kind of ship that's out doing this, right? And there's even some kind of ironic moments where they run into like a fleet of modern whalers that are just using these, they're these, diesel engined big metal ships that are just shooting, they get something like 14 whales in one day, and they've only gotten 2 all season, right? And it has just one panel at the end where it shows the sailors on board those ships, and they're like, this isn't living. Like, if only we were on the Jonah, like that's living for you, right? They're
Yeah.
romanticizing this life. And it's just kind of an ironic contrast
Well, it's right because they
to the
both seem
actual
pretty
experience.
rough. It
Yes.
is funny. As I was reading this, it was I in a way, like I almost want there to be more whaling. It sounds terrible. But in the sense that I mean, despite the fact that this and the most famous whaling story, Moby Dick, right? Neither of them are really like tales of wonderful people doing kind and good deeds overall, right? But there is this kind of sense. There's something so impressive and kind of poetically resonant about killing a whale.
Right.
I mean, I realize this is sort of I don't mean to this, I realize there are reasons why whaling is rare now, not least because there was so much whaling that a lot of species, if not going all the way to extinction, were at least endangered.
Yeah.
So I get it, but it, boy, does it give the chance for this kind of it's just astonishing to think of human beings as being
Right.
capable of defeating a whale in a broadly pre-mechanical age.
Right.
It's just astonishing. I mean,
Yeah.
a whale is a synonym for just unspeakably massive, huge, horrifying, terrifying. It's and also, I mean, I know that there's questions about sort of translating the story of Jonah as whale, but the one of the oldest stories in Western, not even just Western, right? 'Cause it's broader than that,
Yeah.
but in sort of human history, right, is Jonah and the whale.
Yeah.
And in the story of Jonah, right, one thing that people often don't realize about Jonah is it's not like in the VeggieTales movie where he gets eaten by the whale and then he's just hanging out inside. The whale
Right.
kills him. He's dead inside the whale, and in the third day becomes alive again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when
Right.
Christ says, I'm going to perform, I'm going to butcher the line, but sort of perform
The
same
sign of
miracle.
Jonah, I think.
The sign
Yeah.
of Jonah.
Yeah.
There we go. That's the phrase.
Yeah.
I'm going to give the sign of Jonah. That means not just sort of go away for 3 days and come back, right? But there actually already was this sort of prefigurement of Christ's death and
Mm.
resurrection
Right.
in Jonah. So this but right, like the fact that the whale can serve so effectively as a kind of prefigurement of,
Like death.
going into the underworld.
Yeah.
Like there is a lot of
Yeah.
dramatic, poetic, symbolic resonance to whales that, like,
Yeah.
I don't want to say let's go out and kill lots of whales, but like, I'll at least say, boy, it's cool to read stories about people killing whales. I know that
Yeah.
sounds horrible, but like, there's something to it.
No, I get it. And just especially in like the pre-mechanical world. And I think that's kind of
Yeah.
what, because they're using harpoons here. They do use some guns. But just to picture being out on the open ocean, right, in a little boat throwing spears at this massive creature, to try to take it down. And then, it's incredible that people did this. It's hard to fathom. And I do think, in this story, he gets, he captures some of the thrills of that, where there's the thrills and highs and lows that would come with that. And I think that's one of the things I appreciate about this. There's, they're caught up in the excitement at times, and they're just like totally dead dog tired at other times. And it's a very, just has a kind of feeling of reality to it, to me.
Yeah. I just want to
We're
briefly touch on
go for it. Yeah.
the depiction of whales in a daily comic strip, because it is, I mean, even though the daily comics were larger then, but still, it's not a lot of space, and yet it feels so dramatic, right? You have these pages where you'll have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days worth of strips that are mostly showing the whales in action, and it it is inspiring. Like I'm just amazed, right? It's in a way, I'm more impressed by this than I would be by just a Sunday strip
Yeah.
doing a whaling story, because this is not a lot of space, and yet his use of perspective here, that it I'm not even exactly sure what he's doing here, but like it feels like a whale. Like
Yeah.
the image that really sticks out at me there is towards the top of the page there on the left. You see the men in the boat and just the whale's tail out of the water.
Yeah.
And it's just huge and causing these waves. And the people are I mean, they're not specks, but they are a fraction of the size of this tail. And
Yeah.
like and it's really nicely uh rendered in ink and well shaded, that just hit, like, that image in particular, I think, is going to stick with me, of that tail
Yeah.
coming out of the water.
Yeah, so I think this page is a great example of why he's such a fantastic artist, and really, I honestly think one of the best, working in this medium. If you compare, just we were looking at Popeye earlier, right? And I think Popeye is great, but you pick in just about any daily strip, you can just turn back and forth, and you compare the depth that he manages to get out of these pages, with just like by balancing his values out so well. And it's even interesting, this page particularly, is because you can see all these different techniques he's employing right now. So, we have kind of halftone line screens going right here, where he's using that to get, these kind of flatter shades. But then he'll just break out a crayon, actually, to color this. So it's a totally different technique that he's using on this page, or on these strips. And then this is just, this strip here, there's no kind of third party. He's just using lines to kind of get this effect of just, kind of cross hatching, to get these midtones here. And it's all different stuff that you can use. These are all different techniques, and he's great at all of them. And it gives these pages, I think, so much depth when you look at them, that they're small, even at their smaller size. You really feel like kind of the vastness of the ocean, kind of the darkness of the night here, the size and scale of the whale, versus the people in the ship. And then at the final thing, I think call out is, I mean, I could talk a long time about, Roy Crane and why he's so good, but I think his choices as a storyteller are so fantastic, and just what he chooses to show you in a given scene. Like, so we talked previously about, Captain Foley, but there comes a point where the mate murders Captain Foley. And Wash is the only one who kind of overhears this interaction. And it happens just in one strip, right, where you see the mate hooking the captain who's running away from him on the shoulder. You get this shot of Wash totally silhouetted in darkness. Then there's just a splash in the water, and the mate walks back alone, right? And
yeah,
it's so effective, just 4 panels, right? You're not doing a lot. You're not changing perspective a ton, but he knows exactly where to put his details in. Even in, some scenes, they won't have a background, right? And then other ones he will, just to give you that setting for what you're looking at. He just knows exactly what right details to display here, and to pick, to just tell the story perfectly in just 4 panels on a given day. And his stuff is just so alive with like movement, even without being simple, while maintaining simplicity. I don't know. I'm such a fan of his art, and it's one of those that always inspires me whenever I open it up, on just a number of different levels. And he was, very, even though he's not really widely remembered today. I mean, Captain Easy was the model for Superman for, back in the day. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster based Superman off of Captain Easy. There's a lot of much more famous cartoonists were and are big Roy Crane fans from just his work. So he's had an impact, even though his stuff isn't widely.
I know my kids are young, but I was, as I was reading this, sort of thinking like, in a couple of years they're gonna love this. Like, I really want to get the collection, the sort of greatest, the best of, because this just like seems like it just feeds the imagination, right? I mean, I'm a grown up, and it was really feeding my imagination. So I want to get more, and get my sons to read this, because I think they'd love it. So I think that's sort of all we've got for today. So in terms of recommendations, I think Popeye and Captain Easy both were just excellent. And I'm interested to read on my own more of both. As we said before, Fantagraphics has just been putting out nice, I think, hardback editions of the Sunday strips. And they have an older dailies and Sundays, which is hard to find, unfortunately. And it'd be nice to get another reprint of the daily sometime. But the Sunday reprints seem just great. I mean, I know I'm gonna pick up a couple of those myself. And I'd say it's, and it's one of those things where it's old timey, so there's some roughness that you wouldn't get in a kind of contemporary thing that's sort of good for kids, right? There's, punching each other and peril and sort of, jokes about characters sort of diving over into the ocean rather than continue living with Wimpy. But I mean, I would give it to, a 10-year-old. And then, similar, for Wash Tubbs and Captain Easy, it's a bit grimmer. It's a bit more sort of intense, but again, I think it's the kind of story that a kid will really enjoy, and that we might be sort of like a little bit hesitant about, but then they would love it and not be that worried about.
I think with the only caution I would throw out there is with Captain Easy and Wash Tubbs, there's definitely he likes drawing beautiful women, so and sometimes they don't have a lot on, depending on the setting, but still fairly tame by modern standards, but. Mm-hmm. And there is some it's a little bit more violent than maybe Popeye.
Yeah, I'd probably give that to 13-year-old or something rather than a little kid. But
yeah. All right. Well, next week we're going to be reading Hellboy, The Wolves of St. August, and The Chained Coffin.
And for anybody who sort of has just joined us for the newspaper strips, we do cover kind of everything from newspaper strips, contemporary stuff, manga, French comics. We try to do a little bit of everything. So hope that you'll continue to join us for the ride. And if you enjoyed this episode of Truth Beauty Comics, there are 3 things you can do for the podcast to support it. And the first one, right, is just what I just said, which is keep listening and tell your friends about it.
Second is to review the podcast, giving it 5 stars wherever you listen to us.
The last thing you can do is consider contributing to our Patreon with a monthly donation. For as little as $3 a month, you can get perks like access to exclusive episodes, voting on topics for upcoming episodes, and even an original drawing from Levi. Most of all, you can help make this podcast sustainable.
That's the end of the episode. You can reach us at truthbeautycomics@gmail.com or on our social media accounts. Thanks for listening. Remember to take comics seriously and have fun while doing it.